What? A match. I mean, what did we just watch? 13 goals across 2 legs. 13. That's not a semifinal. That's a fever dream dressed in Champions League branding and held together by pure chaos. Inter 4, Barcelona 3, 7-6 on aggregate. And I know I'm supposed to be composed, insightful, articulate, but can we take a second to appreciate the absolute nerve of this tie? The gall of it. The theatrical absurdity. Every time you thought the curtain was coming down, it got yanked back up and someone else walked on stage with a monologue. And then there's Jan Sommer. That man is no longer a goalkeeper. He's a magician in gloves, a Swiss fortress, a bouncer at the gate of footballing heaven telling Yamal, "Not tonight, child." It's one of the finest performances I've seen in a Champions League semi-final, not just for the sheer number of saves, but for their timing, their necessity, and the way he radiated calm in the middle of an electrical storm. There were saves that defied gravity, logic, and maybe ethics. 9 shots from Yamal alone. 9! And Sommer just kept saying no. Not today. Not now. Not while I've still got legs under me and latex on my hands. And the thing is, Yamal wasn't even bad. He was brilliant. He was electric. He was wriggling through defenders like he had a cheat code. And still, Sommer kept him out. Again and again and again. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because this was more than Sommer's night. This was a full-blown epic. And I don't mean that in the Instagram sense of epic sunset or epic burrito. I mean Homeric, Odyssean. This was a 2-legged myth soaked in rain and roars and regret. Both legs started the same way, Inter leaping out to a 2-0 lead like a sprinter breaking from the blocks. And both times Barcelona clawed their way back with that twisted, poetic inevitability of a good horror film. You knew it was coming. You couldn't stop it. You just had to watch it unravel. At Montjuic, it was 6 goals and 6 heartbreaks. In Milan, it was even worse. Or better, depending on your taste for drama and cardiovascular distress. Rafinha's goal in the 88th minute felt like the final act, the last twist, the sucker punch. You could practically hear the air leave San Siro. Barcelona were through. The comeback kings had done it again. They'd flipped the tie, the narrative, and the continent's expectations. And then, a Serbi happened. 37 years old, bald, grizzled, unsentimental. And there he is, in the box like some ancient ghost summoned for one last act of defiance. He didn't just score. He detonated that ball into the top of the net like it had wronged his ancestors. It was a moment out of time. A defender's goal in a striker's body. And it took us into extra time. Of course it did. Of course. From there, Fratesi, that chaos merchant, that opportunist, that runner from deep, slotted home what proved to be the winner. And not with flair, not with a flourish, but with cold, clinical precision. It was a goal that said, "I do this now." And then he almost passed out on the pitch, because apparently footballers are human after all. And still Barcelona pushed. Still they probed. Still Yamal danced on that right flank, tormenting Carlos Augusto like a mosquito in a tent. And still Sommer stood firm, like a bouncer refusing entry to the prettiest VIP in football. You could write a thesis on this match and still miss the feeling of it. You could print out the stats, the expected goals, the possession percentages, the passes completed, and you'd still be lying to yourself. Because what happened at San Siro wasn't numbers. It wasn't tactics. It was theater. It was Inter's tradition crashing into Barcelona's belief. It was Inzaghi's pragmatism against Flick's endless reshuffling. It was Lautaro Martinez running himself into the ground and then digging deeper. It was Rafinha clawing for relevance, Lewandowski chasing shadows, Fratesi rising out of the mist like a recurring dream. It was heartbreak and heroism and that strange, inexplicable thing that only football can do. Make time stop. Make hearts rise. Make you believe, then break your belief in half. And here's the thing. Either side would have been worthy finalists. If Barcelona had edged it, we'd be talking about Yamal's coronation and Rafinha's redemption. If Inter had collapsed, we'd be dissecting their mental fragility and cursed legacy. But neither of those scripts played out. Instead, we got something better, something messier. We got a match for the ages, a tie that bent reality, a semi-final that gave us everything. This is what we mean when we talk about the magic of the Champions League. Not just the goals, not just the saves, but the raw, living pulse of it all. And we're just getting started. The first half felt like a heavyweight fight, where one boxer lands early haymakers, but knows, deep down, that the other guy's still standing. Inter came flying out of the gate like they'd been shot from a cannon, channeling all the noise, the tension, the history of San Siro into two sucker punches that left Barcelona wide-eyed and stumbling. First, Lautaro Martinez, the captain, the warrior, the guy who looks like he bench presses spite, slices through with a classic striker's finish after Dumfries picks him out. And I mean classic. Low, precise, utterly disrespectful to the art of defending. That made it 4-3 on aggregate. The air in the stadium turned from buzz to belief. Then the penalty. Cubarsi, poor soul, steps into Lautaro's path like someone who just wandered into traffic. The video assistant referee does its slow, cruel rewind and pause routine, and the referee points to the spot like he's been waiting all his life to do it. Hakan Çalhanoğlu, Inter's midfield metronome, steps up and sends it into the bottom left corner with the kind of elegance that makes you question your own posture. 5-3 on aggregate. Barcelona, supposedly modern football's artists, suddenly looked like they'd shown up to a gallery with finger paints. But that was only the first half. And if you've watched even 5 minutes of Barcelona this season, you knew it wasn't over. They come back. They always come back. It's not a tactic anymore. It's a compulsion. Second half, different tone. Same match. And this time, Barcelona brought the canvas and the brushes. Eric Garcia. Yes, that Eric Garcia. The guy you'd least expect to finish a volley with the conviction of a peak-era striker. He connects on Martin's awkward cross like he's been waiting his whole life to shut everyone up. 5-4. Then comes Dani Olmo, a player who moves like a whisper but strikes like thunder. Another Garcia cross, another header. 5-5. Suddenly, Inter's early lead looks like a distant dream. The stadium doesn't go quiet, it holds its breath. All of it. 40,000 people forgetting how lungs work. Rafinha's goal in the 88th minute? That wasn't just a goal. That was a statement. A scream into the Milan night. First shot parried, second shot drilled home like a hammer through glass. 32 goals on the season, 13 in the Champions League, one away from Lionel Messi's record. It was as if Rafinha stood there and said, "Don't compare me to the past. I'm writing a new script." 6-5 to Barcelona. They were through. You could feel it. Except no, they weren't. Because in the 93rd minute, from the depths of nowhere, comes Francesco Acerbi, a man who has lived about 3 footballing lives already. Cancer survivor, defensive rock, now miracle goal scorer. The ball drops to him and he doesn't think. He knows. One swing of the boot and the ball screams into the top of the net like it's angry to still be part of this nonsense. San Siro doesn't erupt. It combusts. 6-6 on aggregate, cue extra time, and honestly at that point I had no idea who was going to win. Barcelona had all the momentum. Inter had all the madness. It was a coin toss in a hurricane. The rain started falling harder. Players started dropping like wilted flowers. It was less a football match and more a spiritual endurance test. Then 99 minutes in, Davide Fratesi, a man who looks like he just sprinted out of a Serie A time capsule, gets the ball in the box. And he doesn't panic. He passes it into the net like he's playing five-a-side with his mates. 7-6. And this time, for real, it felt like the dagger. Barcelona weren't done, though. Of course they weren't. Yamal nearly equalized. Lewandowski nearly headed it home. Fort crossed into the void. Sommer said no. Again, always. The final whistle? That wasn't a whistle. That was an exorcism. 2 hours and 3 minutes of football that bent time. That ripped up every plan, every script, every analyst's smug prediction. This wasn't extra time. This was borrowed time. This was divine punishment and heavenly grace rolled into one endless, breathless night. And somehow, Inter are the ones who walk away. They limp, they collapse, but they walk away. Barcelona, they vanish into the rain, full of regret and empty of answers. Let's talk about these two teams, and try, for a moment, not to scream. Because what makes this whole thing so outrageous is how even it was. Not even in the boring, statistical sense, but in the soul-crushing, tear-your-hair-out sense that either of these teams could have, should have, gone through. Inter and Barcelona weren't just playing each other, they were mirroring each other, blow for blow, mistake for mistake, moment for moment. Two giants, punching through time. Let's start with Inter, the maddest of machines. You never really know what they are until they show you, and even then, you're left blinking. Simone Inzaghi's side aren't sleek. They're not dripping with prestige, but they are durable, hardened. They're the type of team that you only beat if you rip out their soul, and even then, you'd have to double-check the body's cold. They play this weird, wonderful version of power football with just enough flair sprinkled on top to hurt you. Lautaro Martinez is the beating heart, aggressive, relentless, a striker who thrives on chaos and converts it into goals. Dumfries is a cyclone masquerading as a wingback. Bastoni strides like a midfielder in a defender's shell. And Acerbi, I still don't know if he's a myth or a man. They're not the most expensive team, they're not the youngest, the fastest, or even the prettiest. But they are carved out of granite. They are the footballing equivalent of a wall that's been rebuilt after every siege. Stronger, smarter, and slightly more sarcastic each time. And what about Barcelona? They're ridiculous in a different way. A team with the talent of royalty and the emotional stability of a telenovela. A team that, at their best, looks like they're playing a different sport. At their worst, they look like they're trying to remember which sport that is. Under Hansi Flick, they've become a little more German, a little more ruthless, and it shows. This isn't the tiki-taka daydream of old. This is a more vertical, pragmatic version of Barcelona, still packed with outrageous skill, still devoted to young talent, but now with steel tucked inside the silk. And oh, the youth. Lamine Yamal, 17 years old and already carrying the hopes, dreams, and tactical shape of an entire club. He was sensational. He didn't just run the wing, he reinvented it. Overlapping himself, slaloming through inter-defenders like they were traffic cones at a training ground. Every time he touched the ball, you thought something might happen. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, but the threat alone was enough to melt Inter's back line. Then there's Dani Olmo, the shapeshifter, Pedri, the time traveler, Rafinha, equal parts artist and anarchist. They weren't just in this game, they took over the second half. They flipped the tie on its head and stared Inter straight in the eyes. And they didn't blink. But here's the problem. All of that brilliance. And still, it wasn't enough. That's the tragic magic of football, isn't it? Being the better side for long stretches means nothing if you don't finish the job. Barcelona might have had the better chances, they might have bossed possession, they might have pulled off yet another miracle comeback. But in the end, they were undone by two things: Inter's refusal to die, and Jan Sommer's refusal to let the ball pass. And let's not pretend this was some freak show where Barcelona collapsed. This wasn't a bottle job. This was two elite clubs trading supernovas until one finally blinked. This was Ali versus Frazier, over two legs, with tactical noose and last-minute subs instead of uppercuts and jabs. Inter go on, Barcelona go home. But both teams gave us something unforgettable. Something that reminds you why we endure all the nil-nils and the missed sitters and the dead rubber group stage games. Because sometimes, very rarely, the game delivers something this pure. There are no villains here, only survivors. Where do you even begin with a night like that? This wasn't just a football match. This was a symphony of individual performances. Players playing out of their skins, rewriting their own narratives in real time, carving their names into memory whether they meant to or not. This was the kind of match where everyone left something behind on the pitch. Blood, sweat, tears, a piece of their career, or in the case of Jan Sommer, a deity-level goalkeeping performance. Let's not kid ourselves. You don't survive a match like this without heroes. You don't make it to the final of the Champions League after a 7-6 aggregate madness fest unless a handful of people lose their minds in your favor. And Inter had just enough of those lunatics on their side. Let's start with the man of the match, the week, the month, the probable season, Jan Sommer. I've been trying to find words for what he did, and I keep coming up short. It wasn't just the quantity of his saves, though, yes, there were many. It was the quality, the poise, the way he turned away Yamal's 9 shots like he was swatting away flies at a picnic. Curlers, screamers, point-blank blasts. He ate them all. And not once did he look panicked. Not once did he look like he didn't belong. At one point, it stopped feeling like Barcelona were trying to score. It felt like they were testing the physics of shot stopping, as if someone in a lab coat had said, "Let's see how much we can throw at this guy before he breaks." But he didn't. He was the calm in the storm, the eye of the hurricane, the only grown-up in a school play that went completely off the rails. And the defenders in front of him? Let's talk about Francesco Acerbi, 37 years old. A man who's been through real-life hell and decided that extra time in a Champions League semifinal was not the day to call it quits. His goal. His goal. A striker's hit in a defender's body. He took that strike like he was owed that moment, like he had waited through decades of shirt-pulling and headbutts and corners swung over his head for that. And when it landed, the whole world paused. Then there's Bastoni. Booked late, breathing heavy by the end, but still pressing, still fighting. He and Bisek were dragged across the earth by Barcelona's movement, and still, somehow, they made it through. Inter's backline bent like steel under heat, flexible but never snapping. Denzel Dumfries, what an engine. What a presence. He wasn't just creating havoc down the right, he was doing it with rhythm. He assisted, he defended, he danced. And that cross to Acerbi? That wasn't luck. That was determination wrapped in precision. But if Inter's heroes were forged in grit and resistance, Barcelona's stars shone through sheer chaos and flair. Where do we even start with Lamine Yamal? He's 17. 17. And here he was on one of the biggest stages in club football, terrorizing Inter's defense like he'd been doing it for decades. He doesn't just dribble, he disassembles. He melts defenders down into their component parts. I lost count of how many Inter players he turned into cones. He didn't score. Sommer made sure of that. But he did everything else. He was relentless, fearless, outrageous. Watching him feels like standing too close to a lightning storm. Beautiful, but you know you're in danger. Then there's Dani Olmo. Always ghosting, always lurking, and then boom, he's there, connecting with a header, slinking into space, finishing with lethal grace. His ability to shift tempo mid-run makes him such a nightmare to defend. 1 second he's your shadow, the next he's your executioner. Pedri's role was more subtle, threading passes through impossible lanes, recycling possession like a Zen monk folding laundry. And Rafinha? Pure fire. His late goal had the kind of venom usually reserved for vendettas. It felt like he was trying to score on behalf of every past version of himself who'd been subbed off too early, benched, or doubted. He played like a man possessed. And yet, two of Barcelona's most surprising performers were the fullbacks. Eric Garcia. Let's be honest, when you saw his name on the team sheet, you didn't think Champions League semifinal hero. But what a performance. He scored one. He could have had more. He looked like he'd been swapped with his parallel universe self, who actually enjoys defending. He made forward runs, linked up play, and looked confident, comfortable. It was disorienting, but also brilliant. And then there's Gerard Martin, a name that barely registers outside of Catalonia, suddenly everywhere. He was pressing, crossing, charging down Inter's right side like a man who knew this could be his one shot. He didn't play like a placeholder. He played like a starter. His cross to Garcia was perfect, not just technically, but emotionally. It felt like two underdogs screaming back at a world that had already written them off. Martin wasn't flawless, but he was fearless. And that counts double in matches like this. On Inter's side, Frattesi deserves his own poem. That's the second time in 2 months he's come off the bench in a massive Champions League match and delivered a goal. Not just any goal. The goal, the one that takes you to the final. He doesn't run like a midfielder. He moves like an afterthought that turns into a headline. And that finish? Calm. So calm. As if he knew exactly where the story was going. And then there's Lautaro Martinez. The heartbeat. The fury. He may not have scored a hat-trick, but he set the tone. He rattled defenders. He won that penalty. He dragged his team up the pitch by sheer will. He never stops. He's like a storm in boots. Even Mkhitaryan, 35 years old, legs groaning, still sprinting in the 96th minute, still making tackles, still flinging himself into the chaos like a man who refuses to age properly. You had Szczesny pulling off big saves in the first half to keep Barcelona alive. You had Carlos Augusto walking a tightrope against Yamal and still making it through. You had Taremi delivering the assist that led to Frattesi's winner, playing like a man who came on just to leave a footprint in the wet Milan grass. This game wasn't just defined by tactics. It was defined by people. By the quiet players who screamed when it mattered. by the veterans who refused to let go, by the kids who didn't know they weren't supposed to be this good yet. This was an ensemble masterpiece, a play with too many leads, a film with too many climaxes, and every single one of them left their mark. This has been Across the Pitch, over and out.